Coming up at New Day at Arirang. The Federal Reserve said Wednesday will begin tapering the pace of its asset purchases later in November, the first step toward pulling back on the massive amount of help it has been providing markets and the economy. South Korean President Moon Jae-in met with his Hungarian counterpart in Budapest on Wednesday. The two leaders agreed to elevate their relations to a strategic partnership and step up cooperation in promising industries. And South Korea is set to report another day of cases hovering in the 2,500 mark, with the nation in its first week of living with COVID-19. Hello and welcome to this Thursday edition of New Day at Arirang. It's 8 a.m. on November 4th here in Seoul, South Korea. Thank you for joining us. I'm Kim Mo-gyan.
And I'm Mark Broom. Over the next hour, we'll take a look at the big news stories of the day and get expert insights on the issues facing Korea and the world.
And we start with the COVID-19 situation in South Korea. As the country goes into third day of the Living with COVID-19 scheme, authorities expect another caseload above the 2,000 mark.
Yeah, it's quite concerning, quite the uptick over the past few days due to more meetings taking place, gatherings, social activities happening over the course of the past few days. Health authorities are warning that an uptick in new infections, even from the point we're at now, is inevitable in the weeks to come. For more on this, joining us live in the studio is our chair, Won-jong. Thank you very much, as always, for joining us, Won-jong.
Good to be back.
Now, Won-jong, let's start with yesterday. South Korea had the fourth highest daily caseload in the country. But how about today? What are we expecting for today?
So today, like you said, we had the huge jump in numbers on a Wednesday. And unfortunately, looking at reported cases from midnight to 9 p.m., today's figure will be around 2,500. But cases from Busan were not included in this figure. The 2,140 cases were reported up until 9 p.m. on Wednesday, 134 less than the previous day. 1,743 cases were from the Greater Seoul area alone.
Yeah, so we're still seeing this trend of the vast majority of new cases concentrated in the Seoul area, which makes sense. It's the most densely populated area in the country. There is a worrying aspect to this on top of that, in so much as there are cluster infections popping up at these elderly folk homes, these nursing homes. And these are popping up despite the fact that the overwhelming majority, if not all of these older people, have been fully double vaccinated.
That is absolutely right. I mean, the majority of people in nursing homes are elderly with underlying conditions. And because they're the fully vaccinated group, it appears to me that the long period of time since vaccination means the effectiveness of the vaccine has decreased. That's why the government decided to administer so-called booster shots for those who have passed the 6-month mark since completing their vaccination. However, the authorities are slightly changing their guidelines. Take a listen to what the officials said on Wednesday.
Initially, additional vaccinations are given 6 months after being fully vaccinated. However, we have expedited the booster shots within 4 months for those in vulnerable facilities, such as nursing homes and nursing hospitals.
Yes, the authorities are recognizing these infections could become a bigger hurdle if the booster shots are not administered to this vulnerable group as soon as possible.
Now, speaking of booster shots, Won-jong, what about other countries? How are they doing?
So let's begin with Hong Kong. Hong Kong will start rolling out COVID vaccine booster doses next week. The people can choose to get jabbed with either Pfizer or China's Sinovac vaccine. The elderly will get priority for additional shots, and health workers, cross-border truck drivers, and others who are highly exposed to getting the virus will be in line. Around 1.86 million are eligible. They can start booking from November 5th, and the actual vaccinations will kick off November 11th. Meanwhile, over in Europe, Italy's health authorities have authorized the booster shots from Pfizer or Moderna to those administered with the Johnson & Johnson's Janssen vaccine because of decrease in efficacy shown by the vaccine. And about 1.6 million people will be eligible to receive the shots. The country already started to inoculate vulnerable groups and over 60s with a third vaccine dose in September.
Yeah, the Janssen vaccine isn't getting much good press at all these days. Studies showing that its efficacy drops off drops off much quicker than other COVID-19 vaccines. But let's turn to the vaccination campaign for young children in the United States. The FDA and the CDC already given the green light for older children to get the shots, but now kids 5 through 11 are also able to get it, correct?
That is correct. I mean, starting November 3rd, the U.S. kicked off the vaccination campaign for kids aged 5 to 11. Now, this comes as the U.S. CDC authorized final approval to use the COVID vaccine for children. With this vaccination campaign, around 94% of the total population in the U.S. are now eligible to get the vaccine. And Saudi Arabia also gave the okay to inoculate children aged 5 to 11. The children will also receive Pfizer's COVID vaccine.
All right. Thank you, Won Jung, for your report. We will talk to you again tomorrow.
Yeah.
Thank you. Now it's time for On Point, where we speak to experts to delve deeper into the biggest news stories in the spotlight right now. Countries where COVID-19 vaccines have been widely distributed are suffering from fresh surges in the number of new infections. Depending on what expert you listen to, this is either a puzzling phenomenon or was to be expected. Now, advocates of the latter point of view often point to it being a consequence of the more transmissible Delta variant, which has become the dominant strain around the world.
For more on the resurgence of COVID-19 in developed countries with high vaccination rates, we are joined by Ben Cowling, Chair Professor of Epidemiology at the University of Hong Kong. Professor Cowling, good morning.
Good morning.
Now, did you foresee the surge in highly vaccinated countries? And for fully vaccinated people who may be concerned, why are we seeing so many breakthrough cases?
I think we were expecting it because the public health measures, when they were in place, were holding the virus at bay. And once those measures are relaxed, we do expect the virus to transmit to some extent, but not a lot. And in terms of the vaccination issue that you mentioned, if we didn't have such a high vaccine coverage, things would be much, much worse. If you remember back to a year ago, 18 months ago, the virus was able to transmit much more than it is now. So the vaccinations are doing a lot.
Okay, we are suffering from a little bit of technical issues in terms of what we can hear from you, but we got the majority of that, Professor. But studies out of the United Kingdom, a country suffering from a fresh surge of its own, suggest the immunity we get from COVID-19 vaccines wanes over time, generally 4 to 6 months. Does this mean that everyone is going to have to get booster shots twice a year for an as yet undetermined period of time?
I don't think that's the case. So the immunity that you get from the third dose takes you to a much higher level of immunity than you got after your second dose. So after the second dose, you were at a reasonable level, but that comes down over time. The third dose takes you up to an even higher level than you were after the second dose. That is going to wane over time as well, but not as quickly. So maybe annual boosters, but we'll have to see. Maybe the fourth dose is going to take you to an even higher level than the third dose, and so we'll need them less frequently in the future. We don't know yet. Let's wait and see.
And Professor, the widely held notion is that vaccinated people clear the virus more quickly if they catch it. But data out of Israel shows some fully vaccinated people there are getting very ill and some even dying. And it looks like we're also seeing similar things here as well. To people not yet vaccinated or those skeptical about potentially having to take a booster shot every 6 months, what would you say to put their mind at ease?
Well, as we know, vaccination reduces the risk of infection, reduces the risk of getting more serious disease if you do get the symptoms of COVID, and it does also reduce the viral shedding and the contagiousness of people. So it's really, really important. The fact that some people are still getting severe disease even after being double jabbed is unfortunate. But it would be much, much worse if there wasn't such a high vaccination rate. So we have a lot of very compelling evidence that vaccines are doing an enormous amount of good, saving a lot of lives. And for people who have not yet been vaccinated, I would really strongly urge them to consider going to get vaccinated so they can also be protected against the worst side of this disease.
Now, finally, some researchers out there are saying we're in a kind of evolutionary arms race with COVID-19. Do you think rolling back restrictions like we're seeing here in South Korea, not entirely sure what's happening in Hong Kong right now, but while most of the world's population remains unvaccinated, risks the potential of more transmissible and potentially more virulent variants emerging. And as a sub-question to that, some would argue the vaccines themselves are forcing the virus to get much more creative and mutate faster.
Well, the virus will change in response to levels of immunity in the population. And if you think about where the previous variants came from, the alpha, beta, gamma, delta, all of those arose from populations that had a high level of natural infections, and the virus was still circulating, and the delta particularly was from India. So I don't think it's uniquely a situation with vaccine. It's a situation we have to face when there's a virus circulating in populations that have higher levels of immunity. But I don't think we have a lot of choice right now. The measures, the public health measures were in place to buy time until vaccines were available. Now that that's the case, now that vaccines are available with high levels of uptake, I don't think it's possible to keep all those public health measures in place. Unfortunately, it's just not justified for public health reasons anymore. So we'll have to face the risk that the virus might change. But fingers crossed, it's not going to change too soon, or if it does change, it's not going to be something even worse than we've already seen, because it could go the other way as well. It could change into something that's a little bit easier to deal with.
All right, Professor Cowling, we're so much grateful for your insights. Thank you so much, and hope to talk to you again soon.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Thank you. Learned a lot there. Now, President Moon Jae-in held a summit in Budapest Wednesday with his Hungarian counterpart, where the two sides agreed to upgrade their ties and work together for carbon neutrality. On Thursday, he'll attend the South Korea Visegrad summit.
That group is made up of Hungary, Slovakia, the Czech Republic, and Poland, all key economic partners with South Korea. Our Blue House correspondent Kim Min-ji, who's traveling with the president, files us this report from Budapest.
South Korea and Hungary have agreed to elevate their relations to strategic partnership and step up cooperation in promising industries. President Moon Jae-in, on a state visit to Budapest, held a summit on Wednesday with Hungarian President János Áder.
양국의 경제 협력을 더욱 강화하기로 했습니다. 우리 두 정상은 지난해 코로나에도 불구하고 양국이 사상 최대의 교역액을 기록한 것을 높이 평가했습니다. 전기차, 배터리 등 미래의 유망 산업에서 양국의 교역이 확대되도록 함께 노력할 것입니다.
Bilateral trade between the two countries reached an all-time high of $3.6 billion in 2020. South Korea is also the #1 foreign investor in Hungary, which hosts the production factories of big South Korean companies, including Samsung SDI and SK Innovation. During the summit, the leaders also agreed to work toward the common goal of achieving carbon neutrality by 2050.
South Korea and Hungary have both pledged to achieve carbon neutrality by 2050. It's a joint opinion of both countries that carbon neutrality is impossible without nuclear energy.
To this, Seoul's top office later explained that President Moon said that while nuclear energy will be used until carbon neutrality is reached, the country will not be building new plants and will shut ones deemed too old. The Moon administration has long insisted that it would gradually phase out nuclear energy.
President Áder explained Hungary's policy of nuclear energy and renewable energy. In response, President Moon said that while the role of nuclear power continues until carbon neutrality is reached in 2050, he will not construct new plants, close down old ones, and expand the mix of renewable and hydrogen energy to achieve carbon neutrality.
President Moon's visit to Hungary is the first by a South Korean leader in 20 years. The two countries established diplomatic ties in 1989. Building on the summit with Hungary, President Moon will now seek to bolster ties with the Visegrad Group, which also includes the Czech Republic, Slovakia, and Poland, in the areas of science technology, defense, and nuclear. The V4 is one of South Korea's main export partners within the European Union and home to some 650 Korean companies. Kim Min-ji, Arirang News, Budapest.
President Moon is in Hungary, where he met with business leaders from the V4 group. The key point of the discussion was to seek cooperation in 3 fields: EV batteries, new business, and infrastructure. Chang Tae-hyun reports.
South Korean President Moon Jae-in attended a business forum with the Visegrad Group, dubbed the V4, on Wednesday. This event is for South Korea and V4 business leaders to seek economic cooperation. V4 is an alliance of 4 countries: Hungary, Slovakia, the Czech Republic, and Poland. The group was founded in the city of Visegrad, Hungary, back in 1991. Moon suggested cooperation in 3 sectors: electric vehicles, batteries, post-COVID-19 new business development, and infrastructure.
그러나 아직 시작에 불과합니다. B4는 우수한 인력, 동서유럽을 잇는 지리적 이점을 토대로 유럽에서 가장 역동적으로 성장하고 있습니다. 첨단 제조업의 강점을 가진 한국은 B4와 함께 성장하길 희망합니다.
South Korea's major battery makers, including Samsung, LG, and SK, have their production bases in V4 nations. President Moon added that with the combination of the V4's basic science skills and South Korea's applied science technology, it will help the group to be a forerunner with the changes. And said he hopes to work together on building hydrogen economy, a future energy with great potential.
The most important role in the political situation is being aware that it's us, a sense thinking that we're relatives. South Korea's visit made us feel our relative has visited.
The economies of the V4 nations are growing fast and make up some of South Korea's biggest export markets. Through the 7 MOUs signed on Wednesday, which are related to green, digital, and bio sectors, business cooperation between South Korea and the V4 will be much stronger. Jang Tae-hyun, Arirang News.
In Hungary, South Korea's First Lady Kim Jong-un was on Wednesday presented a very meaningful gift from local officials. In an old map that labels the body of water near the Korean Peninsula East Sea. Kim Hyo-san tells us more.
The government of Hungary on Wednesday handed South Korea's First Lady Kim Jong-un a map of Europe from the 18th century that describes the sea on the east side of the Korean Peninsula as Small East Sea. The map provided by the National Archives of Hungary was made in 1730 and shows the waters were perceived of as East Sea in Europe in the early 18th century. Kim expressed her gratitude for the gift.
Thank you so much. I see South Korea here. Thank you for giving us this rare archive.
The National Archives of Hungary also introduced the diaries and books written by famous Hungarian missionary Count Peter Vey, who arrived in Busan in the early 1900s. He was also the first Hungarian to visit King Gojong, Korea's last king, in 1902. According to his accounts, he was confident Korea would play a vital role in the future. Saying she was deeply moved by all the archives on Korea possessed by the National Archives of Hungary, Kim says she hoped for more meaningful exchanges going forward.
I hope the National Archives of South Korea and Hungary continue to transfer, archive, and preserve technologies, as well as people-to-people exchanges. I also hope that today, November 3rd, 2021, is remembered as a meaningful date for the people of the 2 countries in 100 years from now.
In return, Kim gave Hungary traditional copies of the records of the Joseon dynasty, as well as the records of King Sejong. Kim Hyo-san, Arirang News.
We now have confirmation that the Federal Reserve will start winding back its COVID-19 stimulus package. The Fed says it will soon start tapering its massive bond buying program that kept the American economy afloat throughout the pandemic. Kim Yeon-sung with the details.
The U.S. Federal Reserve will start dialing back its enormous COVID-19 stimulus program. It will likely start from mid-November, marking the Fed's first major pullback since the program was launched in March 2020. After the pandemic chilled the U.S. economy and slammed the employment market, the Fed froze interest rates at near zero and began buying $120 billion worth of Treasury and mortgage-backed securities each month. For a year and a half, this aggressive tactic helped pin down long-term rates and made borrowing easier, giving the pandemic-ridden U.S. economy the leg up it needed. The Fed's announcement on Wednesday said it will start cutting $15 billion a month from the bond buying program. Interest rates, however, will remain the same for now.
Our decision today to begin tapering our asset purchases does not imply any direct signal regarding our interest rate policy.
The Fed said the time is right for tapering, thanks to the substantial progress the U.S. economy had made toward reaching maximum employment and inflation that averages around 2%. The Fed is also forecasting the U.S. economy to pick up steam as COVID-19 vaccinations continue across the country. But despite the injection of optimism, many uncertainties remain, including inflation that has spiked in the U.S. due to soaring demand and a supply squeeze. This has kept prices inflated longer than central bankers had expected. But if the American economy manages to meet the Federal Reserve's expectations, the Fed said it will make similar reductions each month and wrap up the program entirely by June 2022. Kim Hyun-sung, Arirang News.
And now we cross over to our Oh Soo-young for Global Insight and an in-depth look at important developments in world affairs.
Thanks very much, Wogan. It's time for Global Insight, where we connect with experts from around the world to hear their views on issues making headlines. After months and months of taper talks, the US Federal Reserve officials said Wednesday that the Fed would end its $120 billion bond buying program starting this month, reducing purchases of Treasury and mortgage-backed securities by $15 billion a month. And the scale of the cutback can be adjusted as needed. The Federal Open Market Committee said that it would start reducing its balance sheets as it was able to make substantial progress towards reaching maximum employment and seeing inflation averaging at around 2%. But now the question is when authorities will decide to raise the near-zero interest rates. And to discuss this today, we're joined by Yang Jun-seok, Professor of Economics at the Catholic University of Korea. It's very lovely to see you again, Professor. How are you doing today?
Happy to be here.
Great, thank you for making time for us. And well, it was quite an early morning announcement for us, around 2 or 3 a.m., I believe. And well, the FOMC statement today about its tapering schedule, was it pretty much in line with what you were expecting about the pace and the scale of tapering?
I think the Fed had done a very good job in signaling exactly what they were going to do. And it did also take into account what the market was expecting as well. So there didn't seem to be any surprise in the financial markets. The Fed said that they will reduce their purchases by about $15 billion per month. And a lot of analysts have been mentioning that exact same amount week or even 2 weeks ago. So I think the announcement was right in line. And there, at least so far, there doesn't seem to be any disruption in the market. There doesn't seem to be any signs of taper tantrum that we've seen in the past. So the market has been expecting this. And the market may be even a bit glad because they've been worried about inflation.
Right, well, I think we can safely say now that the taper talks are all done and dusted, but now it's all about the interest rates, isn't it? What does the statement by the FOMC today really indicate about the timing of the rate hike?
Okay, well, they said that they would not raise the interest rate while the tapering is still in place. And because the tapering will take about 8 months to complete if they stick to this schedule that they've announced, the interest rate increase will probably not take place until at least 8 months from now when the tapering begins. And some analysts have been saying that perhaps the Fed will raise the rates during the first half of next year. That seems very unlikely at the moment. Now, the Fed has been mentioning that they have two goals. The inflation goal, which has been not met because inflation has been running higher than the Fed expected. So in that sense, the beginning of tapering, you can argue, is a bit overdue. But they've also said that they wanted to have maximum job creation. Right now, the job numbers in the United States, it's about 5 million jobs less than it was before the coronavirus. So at least in that sense, they have some ways to go. So this is, in a sense, somewhat splitting the difference. It's not raising the interest rate, but they are signaling that they want to control inflation. So they're probably going to wait until they see more job creation taking place, or if the inflation gets substantially worse than it is currently. But right now, I don't know if the inflation will get worse. If you look at month-to-month figures, it seems to be settling down a little bit, even though it's still at a high level. Interest rate, if it is going to rise, it's probably going to be at the second half of next year.
So you do see some risk to inflation worsening. I mean, given the supply chain bottlenecks and also many are worried about the pace of economic recovery as well. So with all of this in mind, I mean, when do you think would be the right time to start hiking those interest rates?
Okay, well, we're in a bit of an uncovered ground because, well, we never had a pandemic like this before, and we never had a monetary policy like this before. So they're going to be looking at data very closely. Right now, the Fed is sort of betting the store on the fact that the inflation will go down. Right now, the reason that inflation is high is because of coronavirus causing some supply disruptions and the ports causing some bottlenecks in transportation. So the Fed expects that once coronavirus settles down a bit more, those bottlenecks and those production problems will cease and prices will go back to normal where it was in 2019 or so. If the Fed's expectations are correct, then we should see continuing lowering of inflation as the COVID situation recovers. But the big question here is what will be consumers' expectations? If the inflation runs longer than expected, people may raise their expectations of what the inflation is going to be, and that we haven't heard this word for a long time, wage price spiral, which will make inflation worse and even longer lasting. So what's really going to be important here is the length of inflation that we're going to have and how that affects consumer expectations, not only in the United States, but around the world.
Well, in Wednesday's statement, Fed officials did seem to acknowledge these concerns about inflation, and it said in its statement that sorry, let me read it for the exact quote. Yes, it said that inflation's been driven by transitory factors, and for months it's been saying that inflation is transitory. So you can see that it changed its wording there slightly. Do you think that the language was reassuring enough for traders?
Well, I think they're acknowledging what's going on, acknowledging the facts. The Fed has been saying that this will be transitory, and the way that they had mentioned it a few months ago was that at most it would last a month or two, but it's lasting longer than that already. And that may have caused the Fed, not only the Fed, but central banks around the world, some credibility, because inflation has both been higher and longer than what they've been stating. So this is just, I think, acknowledging the facts as it is happening right now. And the question is how much higher and how much longer. Chairman Powell and U.S. Treasury Secretary Yellen has both stated that the inflation is now going to be longer than expected, and it's going to last until at least the beginnings of next year. If the month-to-month inflation falls, then I think the market will be reassured. But if the month-to-month inflation rises, then they may have some problem in maintaining their credibility.
And as well, normally a slowdown in economic growth is expected when rate hikes begin kicking in, and that's very worrying for the US economy, of course, because it hasn't fully recovered from this COVID-19 pandemic. So how do you expect the course of recovery to look? Do you think economic growth is going to slow down next year?
I think it'll for the United States at least, they're having a fairly strong increase in spending. In August, the personal consumption expenditure rose by 1%. In September, it rose by 0.6%. One of the major reasons why the U.S. is having a bottleneck is because the imports of goods has risen because of the increased demand. I expect that to continue. This is the infamous revenge spending, pent-up spending that we've been hearing about. And that will probably continue for the near future. In the longer term, because the recession has been K-shaped and recovery has been K-shaped, so that the richer part of the population has a lot of money, but the poorer part of population has some real problems. We don't know quite yet if the spending pace is going to continue, but then the United States right now has $1.5 trillion infrastructure plan and $1.5 to $1.175 trillion welfare and climate spending plan. We don't know if it's going to pass Congress, but if it does, that'll provide another boost to consumer and government spending, which should maintain relatively high rate of growth. But it'll have to pass Congress first, and we'll have to see whether the more richer part of the population spending wins out over the poorer part of the population's reduction in spending.
And well, before Wednesday's announcement was made, the Treasury's yield curve had been flattening for some time as short-term borrowing costs surged. How is the market now responding to the outcome of this policy meeting?
Okay, well, bond market, if you look at the Bloomberg Bond Aggregate Index, it's been showing that it'll experience a loss this year. I think everybody expects that because of the high inflation as well as the expectation of lower tapering. But on the other hand, the stock market has been shrugging this off. They've reached record highs yesterday, even after the tapering announcement. And again, there doesn't seem to be any signs that we're having a taper tantrum. So everything seems to be not beyond what the market expected. So we will have some problems in short-term borrowing, but that's exactly why the Fed wants to do this. Too much short-term borrowing may have fed into the asset markets like the stock market and the housing market, which is experiencing such record highs. Some people, including myself, think that it's at least the beginning of a bubble, so they want to pop it as quickly as possible. So the difficulty in short-term borrowing is probably exactly what the Fed wants and what even some financial people want, because they don't want if there is a possibility of bubble, they really don't want to have it grow too much.
So while many traders seem to believe that Fed might introduce the rate hikes a bit earlier than expected, like even as early as June 2022, do you think these traders are getting ahead of themselves, or do you think they might be onto something?
Well, I expected personally that there might be a possibility that they will raise the rates at the first half of the year next year. But the Fed's position has always been that they will consider raising the interest rate only after the tapering has completely stopped. So unless the pace of the tapering accelerates, that rules out the first half of next year. Now, the Fed has opened itself to saying that we will decide on the pace of tapering depending on what they see in the economic data. So possibility that tapering will accelerate is there, but I think they'll try to stick to the schedule as much as possible. So if you're a betting man, and if you really want to bet, then the first rate rise is going to probably be the second half of next year.
Well, I don't know enough to bet, but maybe with your advice, I might do next time. But anyway, well, over here in South Korea, the central bank here has been also inching towards a rate hike as well after leaving it set at 0.75% last month. Can we expect the Bank of Korea to keep raising the key rate throughout 2022?
I think the case for Korea is, in a sense, even stronger because Korea didn't raise the interest rate necessarily because of inflation rate. The Bank of Korea raised its rates because of the household debt and corporate debt problem. The corporate debt and household debt has been rising very quickly, and it's among the highest in the OECD right now. So that's the main reason why they raised the interest rate. That has seemed to have slowed but not stopped the rise in the household debt. In fact, the beginning of the beginning of the interest rate rise may have accelerated some people's desire to get household debt, get the loans while the interest rate is still low. So I think in that sense, to maintain that goal, it is in South Korea and Bank of Korea's interest to raise the rates a few more times, one time perhaps at the end of this year, and one time at the beginning of next year. And then Korea's inflation rate has been increasing as well in the last couple of months. So that gives an additional reason why the Bank of Korea should raise its rates. Like the United States, the stock market and the real estate market has been rising very quickly, and that may also be a beginning of a bubble. So it's in the interest of the country and the Bank of Korea to pop that bubble. That means trying to raise the interest rate. When the coronavirus started, Korea reduced the interest rate by 1.25 percentage points. Even if the Bank of Korea raises the rate 3 times, as I mentioned, that'll be 0.75 percentage points. So it'll be 0.5 percentage point less than when coronavirus started. So technically, we will have lower interest rate, even with the interest rate cut, than we had before the coronavirus.
Well, it does seem like inflation is everywhere, and we'll have to see how these policymakers plan to tackle it in the months to come, both in South Korea and the United States. And well, this is where we'll leave the discussion today. That was Professor Yang Jun-seok at the Catholic University of Korea. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you.
North Korea appears to be trying to bolster its international solidarity as well as loyalty to Kim Jong-un. Watchers say this seems to be an attempt to further strengthen his grip on power under the slogan Kim Jong-unism. Yoon Jung-min reports.
North Korea appears to be emphasizing internal solidarity centered around its leader Kim Jong-un, apparently to firmly establish so-called Kim Jong-unism. The Workers' Party's newspaper Nodongshinmun on Wednesday highlighted the need to get the North's economy on the right track so that it is not affected by any external influence. It also stressed the importance of internal unity to build a, quote, socialist powerhouse. The paper called for unity and loyalty for Kim Jong-un and the firm establishment of his leadership. North Korea has recently been emphasizing Kim Jong-unism to replace his predecessor's ideologies, marking 10 years of his rule.
This proves that Kim Jong-un's ruling system has been stabilized during the 10 years. It's believed to be a strategy to strengthen the solidarity of the regime, calling for no dependence on the outside. It's to focus more on internal unity based on its own power.
At the same time, the newspaper urged readers to reject any monopoly by institutions and selfism to overcome economic difficulties of the people. This is in line with Kim Jong-un's earlier remarks at the Workers' Party's plenary meeting in February, which strongly warned against an economic monopoly by certain powerful groups. Yoon Jung-min, Arirang News.
The head of the U.S. Joint Chiefs of Staff says there's a very low chance of an accidental conflict with North Korea anytime soon. Speaking at a forum hosted by the Aspen Institute think tank on Wednesday, General Mark Milley said the regime appears to be stable, adding the leadership has good control over the military. However, Milley noted that things can change quickly as 70% of the North Korean military is deployed within miles of the DMZ. His remarks come after the numerous missile tests by the regime, which many saw as an indication of the North's ongoing efforts to build up its weapons capabilities.
An art museum in Seoul that's run by the Samsung Culture Foundation has recently reopened after a lengthy renovation. It's the first special exhibition in 4 years. And it attracted art lovers, including members of K-pop superstars BLACKPINK and BTS. Kim Bok-young with this report.
The Leeum Museum of Art has finally reopened, and it's now the talk of the town. After the late Samsung Group chairman Lee Gun-hee's vast art collection was donated to the country, all eyes were on other art collected by Samsung Group. The Samsung-owned Leeum was at the center of such attention, and now that it has opened its doors after 1 year and 7 months, visitors are busy making reservations to enjoy the collections and exhibitions. Among the visitors are some of the country's biggest K-pop stars. Rose from BLACKPINK and members of BTS have visited Leeum and uploaded pictures of themselves in front of the art pieces. Their social media accounts showed Korean national treasures and astonishing contemporary art such as Cheodam's kinetic metal sculptures and Baek Namjoon's humanoid robots.
One piece of art that keeps cropping up on K-pop stars' social media is Ron Muik's Mask 2. It is a self-portrait of the artist. He seems at ease, free from others' gaze, being his most authentic self. But from behind, the hollow space tells us this is just a mere shell of a mask.
Those uploads are leading K-pop fans to also get interested in visiting the museums.
As a BTS fan, I feel like going to the exhibition they visited. I believe it's a positive influence in popularizing art more.
Leeum wasn't the first museum K-pop stars have guided fans to, when experts say this could be a good start for beginners to get interested in art.
I think it's a really great influence because they motivate people who otherwise maybe wouldn't visit a museum or an exhibition. So it's really about expanding the base of people who feels familiar about arts and museum, and I think it's a really positive influence.
Though experts agree that opening up the art sector to a wider audience is a positive aspect, as those new fans could become future art lovers and collectors, they say it is only one step in boosting art appreciation.
Stars too have their own tastes, so following in their footsteps could lead to unbalanced attention and prejudice towards certain artworks. Trying to understand and study art would be much encouraged.
This increased popularity from celebrity appearances could eventually lead the sector to grow even more. Kim Bo-kyung, Arirang News.
The city of Seoul has a new service for people who live alone, like senior citizens, where they send a personal assistant to help with trips to the doctor. If you make a reservation, a helper will be at your home within 3 hours and take you to the doctor's office. While there, they'll help with paperwork, payments and other things. It costs 5,000 won an hour, which is around $4 US. You can make a reservation by calling the phone number or by going to the website you could just see on your screen there.
Let's take a look at what's going on in the world now. A former Chinese vice premier is involved in a massive Me Too scandal as a former world #1 tennis doubles player, Peng Shuai, publicly accused him of forcing her into his sex several years ago in a social media post that was later deleted. However, a screenshot of her verified Weibo account on Tuesday showed Peng accusing Zhao Guoli of coercing her into sex, adding that they later had an on-off consensual relationship. Despite calls for answers, China's State Council Information Office did not respond to requests for comments, including from Zhang himself. With China's internet heavily censored, searches for Peng's name on Weibo yielded no results, and discussions of the topic had been blocked by Wednesday. Users of chat apps were also blocked from sending the screenshot of the Weibo post. 75-year-old Zhang was vice premier between 2013 and 2018 and served on the Politburo Standing Committee between 2012 and 2017. Peng was the first Chinese player to achieve a top ranking in tennis and is one of China's biggest sports stars. A Belarusian-owned cargo plane, which crash-landed and burst into flames in Siberia, killed all 9 passengers on board on Wednesday. According to Russia's Federal Aviation Agency, the cargo plane circled around after coming in to land before disappearing from radar. Belarusian authorities say the plane had been manned by an experienced crew of 3 Belarusians, 2 Russians, and 2 Ukrainians, adding that the plane had not been carrying any cargo. However, Russian prosecutors later said there had been 2 additional passengers on board.
The local branch of the Russian Investigative Committee announced it had opened a criminal case over violation of transport safety rules. Christmas is less than 2 months away, and if you're wondering what to get your kids, the Toy Retailers Association just released its top 12 dream toys for Christmas. And this year, it seems TV and film characters are set to lead the way. Among items on the list, a car from the hit animated series Paw Patrol, which comes complete with a hidden motorcycle launched inside the body of the car. The 2-in-1 transforming vehicle is from the Paw Patrol movie, which launched in August this year.
It's a vehicle that features very heavily in the movie, in critical scenes where the transformation, plays a major part in the movie. This toy has been designed to replicate that transformation exactly. And you get with it, it chases 2-in-1 vehicle, motorcycle, chase, and some really cool lights and sounds and transforming features.
Other classics like Lego, Barbie, and Hot Wheels merchandise are regulars on the list. However, the main concern in the industry this year is getting the toys to consumers as the world faces massive supply chain and transport challenges. The annual list is selected by a panel of retailers and experts and is a predictive list of what's set to be hot each Christmas. Lee Seung-jae, Arirang News.
Good morning. Rain has passed the capital region and Chungcheongdo provinces overnight, and the south of Chungcheongnam-do and northern Jeollabuk-do province could see rain into this morning. Then the capital and its surrounding regions could see passing rain in the afternoon. But by the mid-afternoon, the skies will get cleared, but dust levels could rise with polluted air blowing in from overseas. But aside from that, readings will remain a few notches above the season norms. And for those in the east, except in Daegu, where the dust levels will be high all day, the weather conditions will be quite pleasant under sunny skies. Morning lows are a couple degrees higher than the same time yesterday. Daejeon at 8 degrees, Gwangju at 9. Well, not much to complain about regarding our afternoon highs, hovering above 20 degrees in the south this afternoon. Gwangju should hit 21 degrees, which is about 5 degrees higher than norms. With that, here's a look at the weather conditions around the world.
And that's all we have for now. We'll be back at 8 a.m. Korea time on Friday for our next edition of New Day at Arirang. We appreciate you tuning in. I'm Kim Mo-kyun.
Yes, thank you for joining us. We'll be here at the same time tomorrow, and I'll be back with our next newscast at 10 a.m. Korea time. Until we meet again, goodbye.
중심으로 강강 쏠래